Now, the top 10 feats in the game are so good that they're all kind of no-brainer spots, and everybody already knows about all of them. But what about the second best feats? In this list, we'll be going over 10 of the best feats which are not overpowered like the top 10, and could be considered in the top 20. And at number 10, we have the Chef feat from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The Chef feat gives you a whole bunch of benefits at once. It basically increases your Constitution or Wisdom score by 1, gives you proficiency in cooking utensils, and gives you 2 special abilities you can use on a short or long rest that allow you to heal and give temporary hit points. The ability on a short rest allows you, as part of the short rest, which means you still gain the benefits of the short rest yourself, to cook some special food for your party, so that anyone who spends a hit die in order to regain hit points restores an additional 1d8 hit points. Now, just a reminder about short rests, you have to spend an hour uninterrupted basically doing light activity, and if you're able to do the whole hour uninterrupted, you're able to spend any number of your hit die in order to heal yourself, plus your Constitution. And this is the main purpose of a short rest, so that you can heal out of combat by spinning your hit die, and you gain 1 hit die per level that you have. And there's also a lot of class features which regain their charges after a short rest, like Warlocks getting all their spell slots back. And if you're in a campaign where you're regularly taking short rests, like in a dungeon crawl, then you'll find out very quickly that your hit dice are usually not enough to get you back to full health. So being able to give everyone in your party essentially an extra hit die every time you take a short rest, because this is not once per day, is actually a pretty decent chunk of healing. Now technically there's a limit to the amount of people you can actually give the benefit to, where it's only 4 plus your proficiency bonus, but with the average party size being less than 5 people, even the minimum amount allows you to basically give this benefit to all your player characters. And this is only a third of what the ability is able to accomplish. There's also the ability where, during a long rest, you can spend 1 hour cooking in order to create a number of treats equal to your proficiency bonus, which can be eaten by any creature you want as a bonus action in order to grant them temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus. Now, in early levels, your proficiency bonus is only going to be around 2 or 3. So generally, this is only going to provide less than 5 temporary hit points. But these temporary hit points last all day until your next long rest, or until the points themselves are used up. They can also be used as a bonus action, which means you can eat them in combat in order to gain a little bit of buffer in case you're in danger. As not every class has access to something that grants them temporary hit points, being able to have any extra hit points at all is better than none. And having this neat bonus on top of a half ASI, as you can increase your Constitution or Wisdom by 1, in addition to a really good short rest ability, just makes Chef a very versatile feat option, which is absolutely worth the spot in a dungeon crawl style game, for at least one person to have it. There are a lot of games which rarely take short rests though, which definitely diminishes the best portion of this feat's ability. But even then, the other 2 parts of this ability are good as well, so you can't really go wrong with it. And at number 9, we have Piercer. This is a feat from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which has the ability to increase your strength or dexterity by 1, allow you to reroll the damage die of an attack that deals piercing damage once per turn, and gives you the ability where if you score a critical hit with something that deals piercing damage, you can roll 1 additional damage die when determining the extra piercing damage the target takes. So it's basically like the half-orc racial ability, except for any race, as long as you're dealing piercing damage, of course. Now, this is one of the few feats which just straight up increases the damage of your character, and since it provides an ASI bonus which is directly related to stats which would also contribute to dealing piercing damage, it seems like a no-brainer choice. Every time you crit with a longbow or heavy crossbow, you're dealing an additional 1d8 or 1d12 damage, which is pretty good. Also, being able to reroll one of your damage die every turn can allow you to turn low rolls into higher ones, which is a pure increase to your damage, and is basically the full effect of the feat Savage Attacker. So basically, you get the Savage Attacker feat in addition to the half-orc racial Savage Attack, and a +1 to your strength or agility, which really just goes to show how terrible the Savage Attacker feat is, where its whole benefit is applied to just a third of a different feat, even if it is only for piercing damage. However, the reason Piercer wasn't in the original top 10 is because if you're using piercing damage with, say, a ranged weapon, both Sharpshooter and Crossbow Expert are some of the best feats in the game, period, and can provide the most amount of extra damage to a ranged attack that uses piercing damage, to the point where Piercer would just be a little bit too far down in priority if you just wanted to increase the damage of your ranged weapons. Although, if you're not a ranged weapon user, and maybe a rogue using a rapier, then Piercer is one of the few ways to actually increase the damage of that style of fighting, even if it's not as much as Crossbow Expert or Sharpshooter. Definitely a solid feat for increasing your damage, a lot better than Crusher or Slasher, which are similar feats to Piercer, only with slashing and bludgeoning damage components, but with effects not as good as Piercer, as it's definitely the best of the 3 specific types of damage feats. And at number 8, we have Eldritch Adept. This is another feat from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This one's pretty simple in the fact that it just allows you to pick one Warlock Eldritch invocation, just as long as that invocation has absolutely no prerequisites. Now, an invocation is a feature of the Warlock class, where every couple of levels they gain a new passive skill which they can pick from their invocation list, which allows them to customize their Warlock to be different from each other, because there is a long list of Eldritch invocations you can pick from. And one of the best invocations is one that increases the damage of your Eldritch Blast by your spellcasting modifier. Although, you can't take that one with Eldritch Adept because it's very strict in the fact that you can't pick a feat which has any kind of prerequisites at all, even if you easily meet the conditions for that prerequisite, like knowing how to use Eldritch Blast. So, the amount of Eldritch invocations you can pick from is actually kind of limited, because the majority of them have prerequisites, as they're usually simple stuff like being able to use an ability, have a specific level, or just having a subclass in Warlock. And of the invocations which have 0 prerequisites, that invocation needs to be better than a normal feat in order to be worth taking the Eldritch Adept feat for it. And luckily, there are a couple of Eldritch invocations which are pretty decent, with definitely the standout one being Devil's Sight. Devil's Sight allows you to see in both regular and magical darkness out to 120 feet. And there's very few things in the game which grant you the ability to see through magical darkness, which is incredibly useful if combined with the 2nd level spell Darkness, which can turn a 15-foot radius sphere into magical darkness for up to 10 minutes. So if you create a patch of darkness, you can just go inside of it and basically have advantage on all of your attacks if the creature you're attacking can't see through the darkness, as well as giving attackers disadvantage against attacks against you since they can't see you in the darkness. Alternatively, you can just cast darkness on your weapon and carry this sphere of darkness around with you so that you're more mobile, with having this permanent advantage in protection. Although there is a downside to darkness, where it's kind of a selfish spell, as unless allies also have Devil's Sight, then the darkness is going to negatively impact them, so it has to be used carefully. But Devil's Sight is an absolute great Eldritch invocation to take, but it's not the only one you can pick up, it's just the only one that's good enough to be worth the feat for. You also have access to Mask of Many Faces, so that you can gain an unlimited use of Disguise Self, and Fiendish Vigor, so that you have an unlimited use of the False Life spell, to grant you a permanent temporary HP boost every time you enter a new battle. Although, those 2 invocations are not worth giving up a feat for, as if you want to increase your survivability, you can simply take the Tough feat instead, and gain more hit points than Fiendish Vigor can grant you temporarily. And being able to cast Disguise Self an unlimited amount of times is too niche to be useful in every campaign. So unless you're really going to get mileage out of being able to cast Disguise Self all the time, it's also not worth taking up a feat for. Although, getting Devil's Sight is. So, Eldritch Adept is basically on here because Devil's Sight is one of the options you can pick up. And at number 7, we have Fey Touched, another feat from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Fey Touched provides you with an ASI score to one of your mental stats, so a +1 to Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. In addition, it gives you the Misty Step spell, which is a 2nd level spell that allows you to teleport up to 30 feet as a bonus action. And then it also allows you to gain 1 1st level spell of your choice, just as long as it's from the Divination or Enchantment School of Magic. And you can cast both of these spells without using a spell slot once per day, and then it allows you to cast them just using your spell slots like normal afterwards, which is not a default of things which grant you the ability to use spells. So that's just a nice bonus, having free access to the Misty Step spell and 1 use of it per day, as it's an incredibly useful spell to have because of just how useful teleporting is in a vast majority of situations, in and out of combat. And the other spell you can pick up is not half bad too, as some of the best 1st level spells to pick with the other options include Hex or Hunter's Mark, if you just want extra damage, Bless, as it's one of the best 1st level spells in the game, Compel Duel to get a target closer to melee range, or Command Spell in order to force a creature to drop their weapon so you can pick it up or kick it out of the way. And the reason Fey Touched is so good when compared to a lot of other feats that also grant you spells is because it grants you an ASI, in addition to some really good spells to pick up, as Misty Step is an S tier 2nd level spell, and Hex and Bless are both S tier 1st level spells. So there's just some really good options you can pick up in addition to getting half a stat. So you're not really losing much if you pick it, even if you might not have as many options as the Magic Initiate feat. And at number 6, we have Resilient, more specifically the Constitution variant. This is a feat which is not from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and is in fact one from the default player's handbook, Normally I don't mention what a feature is from the player's handbook, but since the first couple were all from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, I thought it was probably worth mentioning. Anyways, this feat allows you to increase any of your ability scores by +1. Then, based on the ability score you increased, you gain proficiency in saving throws using that chosen ability. And just a reminder what this means, basically you're adding your proficiency bonus to that saving throw. Now, what makes this really good when you pick this with Constitution is if you're a spellcaster who regularly uses concentration spells. When you're concentrating on a spell, if you take any damage you have to roll a Constitution saving throw, and roll a 10 or higher in order to keep concentration, unless you took 20 or more damage, in which case the concentration DC goes up a bit. But a majority of the time you're just trying to roll a 10 or higher on that Constitution check in order to keep your concentration. And you have to roll this a lot if you're getting hit by multiple enemies. So having benefits to your Constitution saving throw is a must for spellcasters. That's why one of the best feats in the game is Warcaster, because that feat gives you advantage on your Constitution saving throws in order to keep concentration. And what's great about taking Resilient Constitution is that it can be taken alongside Warcaster in order to make your Constitution saving throws even better, as it just gives it proficiency and not advantage, which is generally a build that some spellcasters will take. Usually they'll get Warcaster first in order to get advantage on the Constitution saves, then they'll take Resilient Constitution in order to get a proficiency added to that save, which basically means they're going to succeed all their Constitution saving throws every time they have to perform one for a concentration check. And with how many good spells require concentration, it's definitely a really good option to have. However, if you don't want a higher Constitution saving throw, you could also take it in Dexterity, as Dexterity is also really useful for saving throws as a ton of spells target that. In addition to Dexterity just being a power stat and probably one of the best stats in the game. But the real good part of Resilient is that Constitution part, especially with the Warcaster build, which is why it makes this list, but why it wasn't as good as Warcaster, which just gives you advantage in all those saving throws. And at number 5, we have Alert. This feat is pretty simple, just gives you a +5 bonus to your initiative, makes it so you can't be surprised as long as you're conscious, and other creatures don't gain advantage on their attack rolls against you as a result of being unseen by you, which means if there's an invisible target trying to attack you, they don't have advantage on their attacks, which kind of completely negates the benefit of being invisible. Although unless you're running into a whole bunch of invisible targets, that's more of a neat benefit rather than the reason you take this feat. The real benefit to this feat are definitely that +5 to initiative, and being immune to surprise. Usually, in order to gain immunity to surprise, you need a very specific item or play a specific class. This just allows anyone to have it, which is pretty valuable for having your character not die. And also, a +5 to initiative is just very useful in combat as well, because it's going to almost guarantee that you'll be close to the top of the turn order. And if you're constantly going before your opponent in a fight, this just allows you to control the battlefield a lot better. So there's not a lot of real direct combat benefits to Alert, but it is a very nice combat benefit nonetheless, as a +5 is pretty huge to any kind of roll, especially one which is used in every single combat. In fact, there are some builds which require you to go early in initiative, which makes Alert kind of a must-have in those damage scenarios. And at number 4, we have Mobile. This feat increases your speed by 10 feet, allows you to ignore difficult terrain when you're dashing, and makes it so if you do a melee attack against a creature, you can move away without provoking an attack of opportunity for the rest of the turn, whether you actually landed that melee attack or not. So, the really good part about this feat is definitely that 10 feet of extra movement, because that's huge. That's like increasing your speed by 33%, as the default running speed for most characters is 30 feet. So being able to move 40 feet a turn is just really good for just all kinds of situations. If you want to run away from someone, this allows you to move 80 feet a turn when you dash, which allows you to easily outpace the average humanoid, which can only run 60 feet a turn when they dash, and allows you to keep pace with some of the more faster creatures in the game. It also allows you a little bit more maneuverability on the battlefield so that you can just attack and then go behind full cover every turn without running out of movement speed, which is usually the limiting factor in being able to have cover every turn. And the benefit of having the flyby trait is just really good for melee characters that don't like to stay in melee combat for very long, like rogues or bards, as it allows them to attack and then run out of range without worrying about opportunity attacks. This feat is almost a must-have feature for rogues, as it just makes their playstyle a lot more convenient, especially with them being able to use dash as a bonus action. Although having 10 extra feet of movement is just good for any class really, there's only one other feat in the game which increases your movement speed, and that's Squat Nimbleness, which can only be taken by small races and only gives you 5 feet of extra movement speed instead of 10. Although Squat Nimbleness does give you an ASI, which is pretty good too. In fact, Squat Nimbleness was almost on this list because that's actually pretty decent. And at number 3, we have Ritual Caster. This is a feat that can only be taken if you have an intelligence or wisdom score of 13 or higher, where basically it allows you to learn 2 first level ritual spells of your choice, just as long as those 2 ritual spells are from the same class. And then when you cast those ritual spells, you use that class's spellcasting ability in order to determine its modifiers if it requires any. It also allows you to add additional spells to this feat, as the feat basically gives you a book which holds the ritual spells in it, in the same way that a wizard might add spells to their spellbook. So basically, this feat just gives you 2 ritual spells of your choice, and then allows you to cast them as a ritual, which means you just spend 10 minutes plus its cast time, and it does not consume a spell slot. So you can use the spells as much as you want as long as you have the time to keep casting those spells. And generally, some of the best spells to pick for this are Find Familiar and Detect Magic, as Find Familiar is useful for a whole bunch of different scenarios, as you can see in my video on the best familiars, and Detect Magic is just super useful for exploration, in order to determine the magical nature of things. Although there are a lot of other really good ritual spells at first level, like Speak with Animals or Comprehend Languages, or some more niche first level spells like Purify Food and Drink or Detect Poison and Disease. And a lot of these ritual spells can be cast by the same classes, so there's a good chance you'll be able to get the 2 you want and find a class which is able to use both of them. So if you really want the Find Familiar spell, which is a pretty strong S tier first level spell, Ritual Caster is usually a better way to obtain it than Magic Initiate, because it also allows you to pick another first level spell instead of just 2 other cantrips. And at number 2, we have Aberrant Dragonmark. This is a feat from Eberron, which increases your Constitution score by +1, allows you to learn a cantrip and a first level spell from the Sorcerer spell list, and allows you to cast the first level spell once per short or long rest, and has the ability that when you cast that first level spell that you pick for this ability, you also get to roll a hit dice. And then if you roll an odd number on that hit die, the effect of that hit dice is that one random creature within 30 feet takes force damage equal to the number rolled. If you roll an even number, then you gain temporary hit points equal to the hit dice. And probably the most important part of this feat is that it gives you a flaw associated to the mark, which definitely makes it a go-to feat if you want your character to have a dark curse tattoo, which is a staple of edgy characters in fantasy and lore. However, there's also the fact that in addition to this being the perfect feat to take if you want to play an edgy character, it's also one of the best spellcaster feats you can take on a martial class. Because you see, there's a little distinction about this spell it allows you to cast that almost none of the other feats which allow you to cast a spell has, where it allows you to cast that first level spell once per short or long rest. Emphasis on that short rest part. You gain the spell back after a short rest, which is not the norm. Usually if you gain a spell that you can only cast once a day, it's because it resets over a long rest. This is one of the few which resets on a short rest, which means you can use it more than 1 time per day, which definitely makes this a lot more usable than most of the other feats which grant you spells, as pretty much all of them only reset on a long rest. And the spell you choose actually uses your Constitution modifier as its spellcasting ability, which means you don't need to worry about having spellcasting stats on a martial class if you want to actually be able to cast the spell you gain from the feat. And even though you can only pick a first level spell from the Sorcerer spell list, there are some really good things to pick up, like Shield, Absorb Elements, Featherfall, or Magic Missiles or Ice Knife if you want a ranged damage option. Shield is just an S tier spell to have on a martial class, because it basically gives you a +5 to your AC for a full turn, which can make a lot of martial classes almost unhittable outside of crits. And then being able to regain this after a short rest means you'll be able to use it a lot more often than if you obtain the same spell from something like Magic Initiate. Absorb Elements is similarly useful, as it allows you to gain resistance to a type of magic for a full round, and then increases the damage of your next melee attack by 1d6. Additionally, if you decide to take Featherfall, it's a great emergency save for you and up to 5 of the party members to not die if you fall from like a reverse gravity trap or something, although definitely not as useful as just Shield or Absorb Elements. But if you really want a spell to deal damage with, you do have the option to pick up Magic Missiles, Burning Hands, or Ice Knife for some AoE damage, or Thunder Wave for some tactical positioning. Although if you're picking this feat in order to get a spell which has a damaging component, then you're better off picking one of the better damaging increasing feats instead. Because having the first level version of Burning Hands, Magic Missiles, or Thunder Wave is not very good past the early levels, and will really fall off when you get into tier 2 or higher levels of play. Whereas Shield and Absorb Elements will be relevant all the way until level 20, and be very good too once every short rest. Although when it comes to the cantrip options you're allowed to pick, there are some really good damaging options, which do scale into higher levels unlike the first level spells. And if you're a martial class taking this feat, which is the best way to use this feat, you have access to Booming Blade, which is one of the best melee cantrips. You also have access to Sword Burst in order to have some AoE, which a lot of martial classes don't really have access to, and you'll be able to use it more than once per short rest, like Burning Hands, for example. and this feat's already good with just the spell you can pick. You also have the ability to randomly deal extra damage if you spend that hit die, and generally martial classes have bigger hit die than spellcaster classes, so there's a chance you'll be doing an extra 9 damage to something, or just gain up to 10 temporary hit points, which is also good, since the hit points will last until they're used up. This feat is so good that I kind of regret not putting it in the original top 10 above Magic Initiate. Same with Ritual Caster, really. And at number 1, we have Skill Expert from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This feat allows you to increase the ability score of any one of your stats by +1, just like Resilient. And then it allows you to pick any skill that you're proficient in order to gain expertise, which basically just doubles the proficiency bonus. For example, if you have Persuasion and you're proficient in it, then if your proficiency bonus is a +2, which is pretty common at low levels, then you have a +2 to all the rolls in addition to whatever your Charisma modifier is. If you have Expertise, you instead roll a +4. And once your proficiency bonus goes up to a 3, then you'll be rolling +6 every time. And you get to a +3 proficiency bonus pretty early in the game. So getting an additional +6 to any skill is huge. So huge in fact that picking Skill Expert with one of the S tier proficiencies is sometimes better than picking up a leveled spell. For example, taking Expertise in Persuasion is basically better than being able to cast Charm Person once a day through the Magic Initiate feat, a first level spell which allows you to put the charm condition on someone. Because having Expertise in Persuasion can allow you to talk your way out of pretty much any situation, and is kind of overpowered to an extent. It's supposed to be very hard to gain expertise in a skill, to the point where the only way to do it is through high-level class features, or through the feat Prodigy from Xander's Guide to Everything, that was only available to elves and humans. But with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and Skill Expert, now pretty much any class has the ability to gain expertise in pretty much any skill they want, assuming you have proficiency in that skill first, of course, which is pretty easy to do with your background or class, as based on the default rules of the background, you can change whichever 2 proficiency bonuses you get to anything else you want, just as long as you think they're appropriate to your character. So, by rules as written, you can pick up Persuasion and Perception as your 2 proficiencies from any background. Then take Skill Expert in order to increase one of these 2 to Expertise level, and then you'll have a super powerful character if you pick either of those 2 S tier skills. As Persuasion is probably one of the best skills in the game, as it's probably the most used one when talking to people. Perception is one of the most used skills in the game too, probably even more so, as it's one of the only skills that everybody uses the passive version of, even though there's technically rules that allow you to have passive scores of every skill. And gaining Expertise in Perception gives you an even higher passive perception, where if you take this alongside Observant, you can basically spot all hidden traps and doors the instant you enter a room, in addition to what kind of socks the enemies might be wearing, or how many spiders are in the corner of the next room. Skill Expert is so good that I also kind of regret not including it in the original top 10 list. Same with Aberrant Dragonmark, because being able to gain expertise in one of the best skills in the game is just so good. To the point where your DM might just increase the internal DCs when determining persuasion rolls, because you'll just be rolling super high with Skill Expert. And what makes Skill Expert even better than Prodigy is the fact that you get a +1 to any of your ability score increases, in addition to gaining expertise in one of your skills, whereas Prodigy does not provide the same benefit, as it only gives you proficiencies in a couple of other things, which kind of makes Skill Expert just better than Prodigy, which is restricted to only a couple of races. It's also useful for gaining expertise in Stealth, since Stealth is also a very useful skill proficiency. So as long as you just take Skill Expert in Persuasion, Perception, or Stealth, 3 of the best skills in the game, then this feat is definitely worth it and you'll get a lot of mileage out of it. And if I were to rearrange the original top 10 video, I'd probably put Skill Expert at the number 9 spot on that list, which isn't very high, but that's just because the top 8 feats are kind of overpowered. Because despite how good Skill Expert is, it's not as overpowered as something like Lucky or even Sharpshooter. Alright, and that's the list. Make sure to watch the video on the top 10 best feats part 1 if you want to see why those other ones are just way more overpowered than the ones on this list. And also, subscribe if you haven't already, as only around 30% of the people who watch these videos actually subscribe to the channel.